Good morning. A beautiful, beautiful fall morning in Exeter, New Hampshire. Clear skies, leaves turning colors. It's kind of like we're in paradise. Welcome to our presidential town hall with North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. I'm Howard Altschuler, executive editor of Seacoast Media Group, publishers in New Hampshire of the Exeter newsletter, most important for this location. Hampton Union, Portsmouth Herald, Foster's Daily Democrat, the website Seacoast Online, and Foster.com. New Hampshire presidential town halls, and this space in particular, are steeped in history. Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, spoke to crowds in this very spot in March 1860, just months before he launched his historic presidential campaign. And more recently, we've seen Bob Dole, John McCain, help me out, Donald Trump, Mitt Romney, and some Democrats too have been in this very location. Why is Exeter such a wanted location for political candidates, and particularly Republicans? This is where the Republican Party was born. Amos Tuck, who served in Congress with Abraham Lincoln, brought together a group of political leaders who did not want to see slavery expanded in this country. They met here 170 years ago this month and began the hard work of creating a new political party. The New Hampshire primary itself marked its 100th year in 2020, and in 1920, just a very brief history lesson, I promise, the primary, well, in 1920, there was a reform movement sweeping the country, and the primaries grew out of the reform movement that led to women's right to vote and led to the direct election of U.S. senators. It used to be in the legislature, and it also led to prohibition, but I don't know whether that was a reform that particularly worked. And the idea was to take the power out of the hands of the party bosses, backroom dealing, and put the power in the hands of the people. And that tradition continues today, and all of us here are a part of that century-long and still going tradition. New Hampshire's first in the nation primary has endured for more than 100 years because it works. There's nothing more powerful than a conversation between a voter and a candidate, nothing more true than a questioner's story spoken by a voter from the heart to a candidate who truly listens and understands. We ask that our conversation today, and I know it will be, remain civil and substantive, and let's show the world how democracy is done right. I do want to give a couple of shout-outs to our former House Speaker, Doug Scammon, who is with us today, and his equally impressive wife, Stella, who was a longtime state representative, and Nancy Stiles, who was a longtime representative and state senator from this district. Thank you for being here. And of course, welcome to all our other distinguished guests. On your seat, you'll find a survey card, and please fill it out. Let us know what issues are most important to you. I promise you we will read your responses, and they will inform our coverage going forward. Please remember to silence your cell phone, and as I was speaking here, mine beeped, so I will silence mine too. And now to introduce this morning's special guest and to moderate this morning's conversation, please let me introduce you to my colleague, USA Today national political correspondent, Philip M. Bailey.
Yeah. Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm Philip M. Bailey, as Howard said, national political correspondent for USA Today. I'm going to be your moderator today, and just a few quick things. As Howard said, please silence your cell phone. You do not want to be the person whose cell phone goes off in the middle of all this, so put it on silent, vibrate. Number two, raise your hand when you want to be called on by the governor. One of our runners will come to you. Just give them 3 to 5 seconds to get to you, right, just to come over to you. I know people want to raise their hand, you get called on, you just want to blurt out your question, but just for everyone in here and for the folks at home, just give them a few seconds to get to you. The other thing is, remember, Governor Burgum, like all these candidates, is applying for a job. President of the United States, and you're the boss. So we're on your side here. We want to empower you to have these conversations, right? So again, thank you for your attendance here. Let me first give a brief introduction to Governor Burgum. Born in Arthur, North Dakota, Governor Burgum graduated from Stanford University with a master's degree in business administration. He is an entrepreneur and software engineer who was first elected in 2016. Get this, back then, when he first ran for governor, he was down in the polls by 49 points in the polls. In fact, I looked up the convention ballot initiatives that Republicans were doing at the convention. He came in dead last in those convention ballots as well. But he ended up winning that election by 20 points. So I say that to say he's used to being the underdog, right? So this is familiar territory for him. So let's all welcome Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota.
And we'll introduce the First Lady of North Dakota, Catherine Helgas Burgum, as well. So, it's fantastic being here with all of you today, and I want to thank all of you for doing what you in New Hampshire do, which is giving of your time to be involved and be engaged in the First in the Nation primary. This role of New Hampshire voters is more important than it ever has been before, because not just because we're at a critical time in our history, but because just like there were over 100 years ago, there are powers that would like to take that responsibility of being the interviewers, as Philip was talking about, away from the voters in early states like Iowa and New Hampshire. They want to have clubhouse rules to narrow the number of people that can be involved in debates. They want to try to take a primary and make it into a national primary instead of a primary here where it's intimate and local in people's backyards and in their living rooms. And I just want to say that wherever we go in our country, we're not just fighting for our country, but we're also fighting for the right of voters like you that are engaged, that come and listen and share your curiosity and inquisitiveness, because we know that there's one thing in this country, and that's that New Hampshire picks presidents, not pollsters and not pundits. I had the experience of blowing my Achilles playing basketball right before the first debate. You saw how quick Philip was spinning around in here. I'm going to be a little slower today on that, and we'll see how this whole thing goes. But I do want people to know people ask me, we'll get that out of the way right away. My Achilles is healing up really well, and I have great respect for professional athletes, but I do want to say I made it deeper into the season than Aaron Rodgers did. So. But we're thrilled to be here, and I think I want before we take the first question, I do want to say again we're gathering here today at a time of not just great importance but of great uncertainty. We've seen just in the recent years under the Biden administration where we've lost Afghanistan by our withdrawal. We've seen Putin invade Ukraine, and now with the horrible events that happened in Israel this last weekend, we've seen, the face of true evil. And all of these things I can be pointed to one thing, and that's policies of appeasement by the Biden administration, which are creating a vacuum which is being filled by our adversaries. When we announced on June 7th that we were running this year, we said there's three things we're going to focus on: the economy, energy, and national security. And the events that have played out over this past summer, as we've seen continued inflation, higher energy prices, global instability, and empowered dictators around the world, we can see that the failed policies of the Biden administration around the economy, around energy, around national security are actually hurting every American, and they're destabilizing the world. But I also want to make sure that people understand that I have great optimism about the future. As Philip said, a kid growing up in a town that only had gravel streets and didn't even have a computer, I had an opportunity, to literally bet the farm and have that be the seed capital for a software company which became a global leader in its space. We created thousands and thousands of fabulous high-paying jobs. We competed and we had customers in 132 countries around the world. I've seen what America, when we unleash innovation, what it can do, and how it can lift up everybody, our partners, our customers, our team members, our communities. And so I have a huge belief in that understanding of what we can do and what we can achieve when we have the right framework in place. And I know that right now we're standing at a cusp where technology is changing every job, every company, every industry. It needs to change how we think about government. But the future of this country is unbelievably bright, beyond what anybody can understand, because if you haven't worked in technology, you can't see the possibilities of where we can go. And I would say that we're in this race and we're running for a number of reasons, but one of them is because of my belief in how bright the future is for this country. But to achieve that, we've got to take care of these policy issues around economy, energy, and national security now, so we can go on and improve every American life and reach our fullest potential. With that, I turn it over to Philip.
No problem. Governor, thank you again for joining us. One other quick instruction for everyone. When you speak and you're called on, just say your name and where you're from. Governor, let me ask you the first question here. You've been traveling our country trying to run for president in Iowa, here in New Hampshire. Tell me about a situation or an incident with a voter where that exchange made you think differently, right, about an issue than you had previously thought about it.
Well, I think one of the stops here in New Hampshire that we had early on was really brought home the economic pain. Talking to a third-generation lobsterman who described how he started working, with his, when he was a kid with his grandfather and then with his dad, and now he gets up at 4 in the morning every day. He's out for 12 hours. He's pulling 300 traps a day. He's trying to get his 10-year-old involved in the business to keep the family tradition going on. And then he was describing the challenges that they were having, and some of the challenges had to do with regulation, but his biggest concern was the cost of diesel. And here we have in New England, one of the things I've learned here is that I knew at the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were importing 400,000 barrels of oil a day equivalent into New England. New Hampshire, I learned, has got the highest percentage of people in America that are heating their homes with heating oil, which is not the cleanest fuel. And yet we've got this idea that somehow we've got to have a set of policies to help make sure our environment is as clean as possible. The United States has taken more CO2 out of the air than any other country in the world. And we've done that in part because of the use of clean natural gas. And now we've got this, because of technology and innovation, as close as Pennsylvania, the Marcellus field has got abundant natural gas, and yet you can't get a pipeline built, through the state of New York. There's no federal permitting that would make that process to happen, where we could have New England, actually using clean U.S. natural gas instead of being dependent on dirty Russian heating oil to do that. So, and when I understand now that we've also got, a crunch on refinery, because you can't get refineries expanded or permitted in this country because there's a full-on assault of let's get rid of liquid fuels in this country. And so when I hear that a lobsterman a family that's been doing this for multi-generations may go out of business, for me it increased the urgency of us of understanding the impact of these failed economic and energy policies and their impact on families and impact, because their family also owns a restaurant. So if the lobsterman isn't working, then the restaurant's not working, then all those employees are going to be out of business. And so this is something for me where I just know as a heart of service, I want to fight for families like that. I grew up, every job I had growing up, I took a shower at the end of the day, working on the farm, the ranch, working at the grain elevator, working as a chimney sweep. And my dad passed away when I was a freshman in high school. I mean, I understand what economic insecurity is, because my mom, widow with 3 kids, had to go back to work. And we've got to get things working, so that families and small businesses and that the average person can actually have the opportunities that many people have had since World War II forward, but now those have been wiped out. Not by world conditions, but by policies ourselves that are inviting the problems that we have.
So, folks, if you have a question, just raise your hand and the governor will call on you.
Good morning, sir.
How are we doing?
Good. Mike's on the way, and tell me your name.
So my name's Colton. I am from Exeter, NH. I'm a resident, and you were talking about, the lobster people and all that good stuff, but how about unions, and the unions that are forming across the country, the workers that are demanding higher wages or more fair wages? What is your economic stance on that? Because they're the backbone of most of the automobile and big industries like that. So what's your take on that?
Well, thank you, Colton, and thanks for being here. It's fabulous that we've got people of your generation that are engaged and involved in the process, and thanks for giving us the lead-off question. I made a statement after we had the UAW strike, which may have surprised some people, because I said, this strike is at the feet of Joe Biden. He said, I'm going to go, stand with the workers. I said, the reason why they're striking is because we've got an energy policy that says we're going to subsidize electric cars. That requires about 2/3 less workers. We're going to subsidize the people that are buying those cars up to $7,500 per car. We're going to subsidize the auto manufacturers to help them with the transition. But of course, what's in it for the workers? What the workers get is fewer jobs. And what we're really doing is with that policy is we're taking away American jobs, and then we are outsourcing those jobs to China. And it's not too strong to say that I actually think it feels like the Biden energy policies were actually written by China. Because if you say we're going to get ourselves free from OPEC is somehow, but we're going to switch to Sinopec, because if you want to have a car run with an EV battery, that requires rare earth minerals. China controls 85% of the rare earth minerals in the world. And they call them rare earth for a reason, because they're measured in parts per million. And if it's in parts per million, that means that in many cases you've got to move 100,000 pounds of earth or more in a mining operation to get enough minerals to make one battery. Where's those mining operations happening? They're happening in Central Africa. They're happening in Indonesia. China is providing the capital and running that. Some of the stuff in Africa is happening with child labor. And so we are not helping the environment get better by switching to EVs. That's a complete false story, because in China, there was a story in the Washington Post just this last week praising them for their switching to electric vehicles at a higher and faster rate than America. Well, why would they do that? Because they care about the environment? No, China's the world's largest polluter. They're opening up a coal plant every week. If you buy a battery from China, it was manufactured in a plant that's being powered by coal. And why would they be opening up coal plants? They're opening up coal plants because China is the largest importer of oil and gas in the world. 10 million barrels of oil a day. They have no energy security, but they do have coal. So if they can transition from liquid fuels to coal, that reduces their dependence on the Middle East and on Russia as an oil supplier. And they don't like being energy insecure. No nation would. So they've got their own set of objectives. They have nothing to do with helping the environment. So if we think that somehow we're going to save the environment by outsourcing our dependence to them, and we're concerned, we're in a Cold War with China, absolutely we are, but then now we're going to increase our dependence on them. So in the end of the day, what happens to these union workers is they're being caught in a set of environmental and economic policies which are bad for the environment, and they're bad for the economy, and they're definitely bad for workers. And you say, well, what about internal combustion machines? We've made these out to be the worst thing ever, because transportation, they're polluting. Well, in North Dakota, we've set a goal of being carbon neutral as a state by 2030, with no new mandates, with no new regulations. We're doing that through innovation, not regulation. And in North Dakota, we've got the capability to decarbonize baseload electricity. We've got the ability to decarbonize liquid fuels. We've got a company right now that's using enhanced oil recovery, and they're creating a negative carbon barrel of oil. We can take the CO2 out of liquid fuels through innovation faster than we can regulate an entire industry and all these jobs out of business. And so we have to have someone in the White House who understands the economy, understands technology, and understands innovation, because that's how we're going to solve our problems. That's how we've always won as a country. That's how we've moved. That's how we had the American century, was because of innovation. Whether it's through, the Wright brothers and flight, or the invention of the computer, or the microchip, all of these things that have come from the United States have not come from a government program or government spending. They've come from the innovation and entrepreneurs and risk takers who've bet it all to try to move our country forward. And we have to get back to that if we're going to win this Cold War, and if we have to do that, if we're going to create great jobs for Americans. Good morning.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. My name is Nancy Ryan. I live in Lee, New Hampshire, and I serve as New Hampshire's field coordinator for the National Breast Cancer Coalition. Unfortunately, New Hampshire has one of the highest incidence rates of breast cancer in the entire country. So we have a lot of work to do. And I would like to invite you to support that work, our work and our mission, by signing the National Breast Cancer Coalition's public policy platform. This year, the platform covers 3 major areas: adequate and meaningful federal funding for breast cancer research, access to quality health care for all, and ensuring that educated breast cancer advocates play a role everywhere decisions about breast cancer are made. Would you be willing to sign our platform today?
Well, Nancy, the answer is yes,
Thank you.
because this is a very straightforward, common sense set of things you're asking for. And I just want to compliment the whole movement. I see you've got pink laces in your shoes. But one of the things that I think has been remarkable, we have a number of diseases in this country, including the disease of addiction, that are still highly stigmatized. But it's amazing what the breast cancer movement has done. When I go to a rodeo or a professional bull riding event and I see cowboys wearing pink, when I see professional football players doing that, I'm like, good on all of you, because you basically have moved this out of the darkness and said this is a disease. There shouldn't be shame and stigma related with this, and because of that, more people are getting early detection. Because part of what we got to have the research on the cure, but we got to make it more accessible for people to be early detected.
Right.
That will take the cost out of the system, and that will save lives.
It is a multi-pronged approach, and the National Breast Cancer Coalition, in my opinion, is really leading the charge. So thank you, Mike. I'm so grateful that you're willing to sign our platform. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you for your important work.
Thank
and
you.
all of us have been touched and know people in our families who have gone through this. And so thank you for the great work. Let's give it up for Nancy. Way to go.
I know, Governor, that one of the issues that you care a lot about has been, addiction and issues like that. I saw you get even a little bit emotional there. Talk a little bit, if you could, while other folks sort of still think of their question here. And again, we want you to be the lead of this conversation, or remember that. But Governor, if you could briefly talk about sort of your plan when it comes to opioid addiction and how you as president would deal with the crisis that we're seeing across this country. I know this as a Kentuckian, how pill mills and things of that nature have affected my state. How would you address that as president?
Well, this is an issue that touches every family, every community, and every company in the country. And I say company because in our workplaces, we've got people that are showing up every day at work around the country that are still struggling with addictions. I mean, sometimes we think of addiction as someone who's, homeless and destitute, but addiction it's everywhere in our country. And we're talking tens and millions of people that are suffering under this disease. It's very close to us. The First Lady has been super courageous, and if she could have her own town hall meeting, but she struggled with addiction for 2.5 decades, and then found recovery. But when she found recovery, she didn't talk about it for another 15 years because of the shame and stigma associated with it. And when we became governor and First Lady, she made the courageous decision of, I'm going to talk about it. And she started talking about it in just the starkest, plainest things, telling her story about her challenges and struggling from high school on, and how that addiction, can be tied to mental health and depression. And as she tells her own story at the end, when she was drinking, every time she drank, she was near suicidal. And then here we have now this incredible, courageous person who's leading a whole movement called Recovery Reinvented, which has gone beyond our state. She held her 7th event last week. We had 1,000 people in person, thousands watching online, including broadcast into all of our correctional facilities. Because every correctional facility, if it's a women's facility, it's going to be near 100% of the people that in that women's facility in America, they were a victim before they were a criminal. They had suffered sexual or physical abuse. They had trauma as a child. And then they found themselves in addiction, and then they found themselves committing a property crime or something because related to that disease. And we have to understand that's a healthcare issue. And one of the things we're doing in our state, we've passed amazing legislation, every session, but this year we're actually completely revamping our whole approach to the women's corrections facility, because it's really got to be a healthcare facility. If 100% of the people in the facility have a substance abuse disorder, you don't need to treat it like incarceration. You got to treat it like it's a healthcare, like it's an actual disorder, a place where their families can come and visit them, and it feels like a healthcare campus as opposed to a prison. And why would you say you do that? Well, because the number one predictor of whether someone ends up today incarcerated is if they had a parent who was incarcerated. And so we're working to break that cycle. It'll make our community safer. It's going to break the cycle. And guess what, fiscal conservatives? It costs a lot less. The amount of money we spend incarcerating millions of people in this country, in some states, it's over 6 figures a year. You know, and yet while they're in, they're not getting treatment, they're not getting an education, they're not learning a skill. But our facilities aren't filled up. We hear about the serial killers and the horrible things. That makes the news and breaks through that people are in for life. But in most correctional systems in most states, 95% of the people are coming back out again at some point. So we've got to have an approach where we're making better neighbors, not better prisoners. And that's the approach that we've been applying in North Dakota. But the root of all of this is addiction. It's the root of homelessness. It's the root of a lot of crime. As a sitting governor, I've had an opportunity to appoint 17 judges. So I've interviewed triple in terms of that, in terms of finalist candidates who would come as judges. The question I always ask them is, how much of your time as a prosecutor or a defense attorney or a judge advocate, something where they've been in the criminal justice system leading up to that, where they've been selected as a finalist to be a judge, how much of your work is related to the disease of addiction? I've never heard an answer in the last 6 years that was below 80%. Think of that. Think of our entire judicial system is spending 80% of its cost related to a disease that many Americans don't believe is a disease. If they think it's a moral failing, or they think it's a bad choice, then you're going to solve that with what? Higher penalties, minimum mandatories, taking a misdemeanor and turning into a felony. And then when someone has a felony, then they're in a spot where they're then discriminated. We say, oh, we don't discriminate as a nation. If you've got a felony from a nonviolent drug charge, you can be discriminated against. People can say, you can't live in this apartment building, you're a felon, if that's legal. You can say, you can't work here, check the box, we're not going to interview you. So we have legalized discrimination against people who had a disease, a brain disease that led them into that spot. And so we're trying to flip that around, because we've got a challenge in our country. We have 10 million jobs open, and we have a shortage of healthcare workers. In North Dakota, we created a program called Peer Support Specialists. We have 1,000 people, most of them felons, that have been trained to be peer support for people coming out of the criminal justice system. And guess what? Our recidivism is going down because they can help people find a job, find a place to live, get a driver's license, and if they do that, we pay them more. It's got capitalistic incentives for people to help people stay clean and sober and address the issues that they have, the connections that they need with family and others to stay out. So we're lowering the cost of what we're spending on corrections, we're increasing the amount, and we're creating jobs, we're improving health care, and we're adding to our workforce. It's one of the reasons why North Dakota's got the highest workforce participation of any state in the nation, is because we're taking on problems. This is not a Republican problem, it's not a Democrat problem, it's not an independent. Addiction doesn't discriminate. Income levels cut across everything. And the last thing I'll say on this is, if you don't think this is urgent, then understand that since Joe Biden came in office, we have had closing in on 5 Vietnams worth of mass casualties to overdose deaths. We're coming in on 270,000 deaths in the last 2 years and 9 months of overdoses. 70% of those are fentanyl poisonings. That's 300 people a day that we're losing. And if there was a plane crash today, everybody watching this thing wouldn't be covering this. They'd be covering if we had a plane crash with 300 people down, no one would be talking about presidential candidates. We'd be like, wow, because we haven't had a plane crash and a commercial flight in America in 12 years. I mean, it would be all over the front page. But if there was another one tomorrow and another one the next day with 300 people and 300 people and 300 people, that's all our nation would be talking about. But we're going to lose 300 people today to overdose deaths, just like we did yesterday and the day before. And these are sons and daughters and nieces and nephews and mothers and dads that are losing this thing, and we're not addressing it. So this is a critical issue for us. It's something that we view as a high priority in what we do in North Dakota. Behavioral health, addiction, reducing stigma is something that we really focus on, and it's something that we have to come together as a nation. If there's one bipartisan issue that we ought to be able to agree on, is that we have to address this issue.
Right. Now you want to spin around? I'll leave you to call all the people for questions, sir.
Microphone's coming.
Yeah, I don't know if I get a microphone. All right. First of all, thank you so much for coming. My name is Avik Wadavkar. I'm a student at Phillips Exeter, although originally from Houston, Texas. And I have a host of questions, but more particular relating to what you've said about addiction and the crisis that we have in this country. A lot of candidates have also said that there's a quote-unquote mental health crisis in this country. Do you see these two things as related? Do you have any policies that perhaps regarding mental health that you haven't talked about when you've discussed addiction?
Well, first of all, thanks for being here, and congratulations on getting into Phillips Exeter. No small feat with that. I want to say absolutely. The co-occurrence that we see in homelessness between mental health and substance abuse disorder is, sometimes almost 100%. I mean, that those two things are occurring. And in incarceration, I mentioned women, but on men, it's as high as 80% in most states where there's a substance abuse or mental health issue related to incarceration. So the thing that we need to do is we have to actually treat mental health like it's health. But right now, the reimbursement procedures, and competition and where people make money. The reason why you see orthopedic wings and sports medicine, and here's the children's hospital, and here's the cancer wing, and they've got the names and the donors and everybody on there is because those things there's no stigma associated with it, and it's also profitable for the hospitals. And so we've put capital investment and people choose careers, and that's where they can make money. If you choose to go into mental health as a medical professional, you're going to make less income than if you're an orthopedic surgeon. So systematically, we've been driving more profitability towards some segments and less, and because of the stigma. And again, and people that have mental health issues often don't seek help because they think, oh, I just got to, pull my boots on, and I got to get up, and I got to tough it out, and be from a family. We don't talk about that stuff, and that's what the stigma does. The stigma keeps people from actually saying, I need help. So part of it is destigmatize it the way others, like we talked about breast cancer, have done over the last decades. We've got to do that, and then we've got to figure out the reimbursement system so it supports mental health as health. And then we also have to get donors and others, because oftentimes if you go to the mental health facility at one of these, our nation's leading and most respected facilities, if you want to do the addiction mental health thing, it's in a basement, on the edge of town, as opposed to in the bright, shiny wing where you walk in the front door like if you were coming into a cancer wing. So we just have to have a different approach to it. But this is critical, because for America to reach its fullest potential, we've got to have a healthy population, and we have to address this. As we have to address it as a nation. But thanks for the question. I don't know if Doug had his hand up first or not, but I think you want to go ladies first? We sure can.
Well, Doug, I'm Doug Scammon. I'm also a dairy farmer, or used to milk cows. But I'm very interested in how and I appreciate what you've done balancing the budget in your state, as we've done pretty well in New Hampshire. How would you approach balancing the budget in Washington and cut down the major deficit that we have?
Well, first of all, thanks for being here. And I do want to point out that there was an article earlier this year that Dougs were having a moment, people named Doug. And so I want to thank Doug for sharing that. And I was pleased to find out, because, if you're having a moment, then the name becomes a more popular birth name. And Doug should know that the name Doug as a birth name, we've now crawled back into the top 1,700 most popular birth names in 2023. So we're making our comeback. On balancing the budget in North Dakota, when I came into office, we were in the middle of a huge energy crisis. There was OPEC and Russia were trying to kill the U.S. shale industry by they were overproducing to try to drive the price down on purpose. So they flooded the market with production because they were worried about all this innovation occurring in America, that somehow, because in 2008, it was go back to when I was in high school. When I was in high school, two things were told to me when I was in high school. We're going to run out of energy and we're going to run out of food. The world's going to be completely overpopulated and we're all going to starve. I mean, that was kind of the generic thing. Of course, that didn't turn out to be true. Why? Because of innovation. But, in the 1990s, we've reached, peak energy production. It's going to go down from here. In the 2000, but it was innovation. The innovation around horizontal drilling, which came largely out of North Dakota, is the thing that changed the whole thing. We went from having a decline in energy production to being one of the world's leader in energy production. And that technology is unbelievable. The shale in North Dakota is 30 feet thick, 30. okay, not even as high as the ceiling probably, and it's 2 miles underground. It's 10,000 feet underground. But there's an ability to go down 2 miles, turn that drill, curve it, and then go and stay in that 30-foot section for another 2 miles. And I was in a drill shack when I first got into office, and I was like talking to a young petroleum engineer, and it's not like some Rock Hudson movie from the 50s where oil's spewing everywhere and it's black, it's like that thing. It's like you can't see a drop of oil. It's a completely clean environment. It's all computers, kids in a lab coat. And I said, wow, how do you stay in that 30-foot stretch for 2 miles? And he said, sir, if your house was down 2 miles underground and 2 miles over, I could drill the lockout on the front door. This is the kind of innovation that unleashed energy that we didn't even know existed in our country. We built a set of policies around we're running out of energy, and now in the Marcellus, the Bakken, and in the Permian, that's changed everything around. So the question was about the budget. North Dakota went from an ag state to a massive energy producing state almost overnight because of technology. But when the foreign forces said, we're going to try to drive that price down because we don't like what we see, we don't like the innovation coming from the United States, we've got to collapse that market, we're going to put them all out of business because their break-even point was lower than ours. So they did that. Some companies went out of business. The ones that are still operating, they lowered their break-even. They lowered their break-even. As the price came down, they just kept innovating and innovating. And now in North Dakota, it's not a 2-mile lateral. 75% of our permits are a 3-mile lateral on that strip underneath. They're producing 50% more productive with the same little couple acre spot where they're drilling, and they're drilling 3 miles away. You don't even know that you're in oil country. And so innovation keeps pushing back against these foreign forces and other things. But in this point in time, when I took office, price was down, revenue was down. We couldn't just slow the growth. We cut $1.7 billion out of our state budget in my first 4 months in office, 27% reduction. And you say, how do you do that? You must have cut a bunch of services. We maintained every service that we had. We kept the trains running on time. But it takes somebody who's been in technology. When I was in software, everybody we competed against, there was in the categories I was in, no subsidies, no tariffs, no limits on foreign competition. You could wake up the next day and not only was somebody that you'd never heard of selling the product for less, they might have been giving it away for free and trying to pay for it with advertising. So we had to compete against free. We had to compete against people we'd never heard of. And to do that, you've got to have your product be better and faster and cheaper tomorrow than it is today. Government's never had that force. So when we came in and started looking around at what was going on in state government, we're like, wow, there's a budget process, but there's no planning process, and the strategy should drive budget, not budget drive strategy. And every government agency has this belief that if we get more money, you legislators have seen it, if we have more money, we're a winner. If we get less money in our agency, we're a loser. We had to break that cycle and say, wow, what really matters is your outcomes. And we're going to treat the taxpayers like they're customers. They are the customers. They're paying for all this. And what do customers want? They want better service at a lower cost. And how are we going to do that? So we had 75 agencies go through a strategic planning process, and one of the first questions we asked them is, who's your customer? What do they want? How are you serving them? And then we said, what are you doing that doesn't add any value to those customers? And guess what? 10 to 20% of the work that they were doing added no value. Okay, well, let's just quit doing that. That's how you get to 27%. We stopped doing the stuff that didn't matter. And I will tell you today at the federal level, it's at least at what it was in the state, because we're a pretty lean state. But I know that inside of every federal job, no matter how, the dedicated worker who went into public service because they wanted to have a purpose in their life, and they want, whether a highway patrolman or a local public health nurse or someone who's in game and fish and a biologist, they went into these jobs because they wanted to make a difference. But then we saddle them with red tape and regulation, and guess what? When you strip that away and say you don't have to do that anymore, they have more purpose and meaning in their work. We give them a better job to be able to go forward and do that, and we get rid of cost. And I know that inside of every federal job, there's at least 10 to 20% that's some mind-numbing, soul-sucking work that is adding no value to any citizen that we can get rid of. It's not about, people are good or bad or this or bad or whatever, but there's just someone, you can engineer the workout. We've never had that. So anyway, to Doug, we know how to balance budgets. We don't have a revenue problem at the federal level. We've got a cost problem. And the cost problem is we've never had a business leader with a technology background who's actually done it and then proven that they can do it as a state level. People talk about balancing budgets. They usually do it because their revenue is going up. They're not balancing it because they took costs down, which is something that I've got a lot of experience in, both in the private sector, whatever. So I know that we can do that, and we have to do that because our debt is killing us, and we've got risk to the dollar as reserve currency, and the musical chairs in Washington could come to a halt at some point because we can't keep funding these deficits the way we've been doing it and expect other countries to trust that we're a place to invest in. Because when we overspend, we sell bonds, we create debt. We talk about the national debt. Somebody owns that debt. People are buying that debt. And if they quit buying that debt, and the biggest risk to that, back to energy, we've had, for the first time in history, petroleum transactions are occurring between places like Russia and China that are not being translated into the US dollar first. The BRIC countries want to create their own reserve currency, and which would put us on the sideline as the US dollar. And that's something that most Americans don't know about, don't hear about, and we don't talk about, but it would affect everything we do in this country if we lose our reserve currency status. And we could do that because of the failed economic and energy policies that we have in place right now.
I know we want to get to some more questions here in the last 20 minutes, so let's just try to get to as many folks as possible.
I'm Nancy Stiles. I live in Hampton, New Hampshire. Thank you for being with us today. My question is similar to Doug's. However, I will word it a little differently. If the makeup of Congress remains the same or similar to what it is today, can you talk a little bit about your leadership style that would be able to get some of your policies moved forward?
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you also, like Doug, for your service to the state of New Hampshire. I expect that we're going to have a very closely divided Congress, and you say, why am I, am I some kind of someone who can see the future? No, we just have to look at all the gerrymandering that's gone on in our country that has created safe districts. The percentage of safe districts keeps climbing and climbing and climbing, and so the number of swing districts gets smaller and smaller. And we have it's not just something we would say, oh, they're more divided. We actually are more divided because of the makeup of how we build it compared to where we were in the 60s, the 70s, or in the 80s. And so the idea that you're going to have one party or the other somehow have a 60, 80, 100-seat difference, that's just not going to happen. It's going to be these narrow margins. And so therefore, it becomes critically important that the executive leadership is in the White House is someone that has the ability to keep in mind the interests of all Americans. And one thing that we've done in North Dakota, when we won, they mentioned the thing that we won that primary by 20. We won the general election by over 40 in 2016 as an outsider. But we came in as an outsider. In 2020, some outsiders lost. We won again by over 40 points. These are the largest margins in the country. How do you do that? You do that because we had independents and we had people from across the spectrum saying, wow, this person cares about all of us, and he's listening to everybody, and they're getting the work done that we need to get done to move things forward. And as we say in North Dakota, when there's a blizzard, and we have those, and North Dakota is the size of all 6 New England states put together. But when we have a blizzard, we plow the roads for everyone. We don't go like, oh, are you an independent Democrat? Did you vote for us? No, we plow for everybody. And the same for our schools, and same for healthcare, and same the way we work with the 5 sovereign tribes in our state that typically would vote for the other party, but we've got the best relationships we've ever had with them, and the collaboration and what we've gotten done to help them and their plight because of they're stuck in a federal system with the Indian healthcare, Indian education system, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where they are held down in a multi-generational poverty worse than anything you've ever seen in any inner city in our country. And no one has ever spoken and fought for them. And that actually is a federal responsibility. That's not a state, it's a federal responsibility. So anyway, we have not only have the heart of service, but we also understand the job. And I will never be a senator. I will never be a congressman. I have zero interest. I'm an elected leader. I came from the outside, but the job has always been, and when I was in business, we didn't ask people their political affiliation. You got a problem, we're going to fix it. My whole mentality is about serving the customer and taking care of people. And I think that right now people are monetizing these conflicts for their next election. And we've got to get past that. We've got to get down to actually doing the work for the American people, particularly because now, from a national security standpoint, I never thought I would ever talk to our 3 adult kids about something called the possibility of World War III. About a year ago, I started doing that. And now they're like, oh, Dad, wow, really? You know, did you see this coming? I said, well, you know, when you create a vacuum, you know, when you operate out of appeasement and weakness, that's what Neville Chamberlain was doing before World War II. That's what triggered World War II. That's what we're doing right now. This naive idea that if somehow that Americans will be safer and more prosperous if our allies are safe and prosperous, not the opposite. So anyway, we've got a track record. It's proven on what we're doing, and it's the whole makeup that we have is the idea that this is an idea that you serve everybody. This is not. You have to get elected through a primary. You've got to get elected in a competition with another party in our country. But once the day you take office and you take that oath of governor or president, you are working for everyone.
There are a few questions on here or all around, Governor. Just spin around, you'll be able to see.
Philip, you want to go here and then back over here?
Hi, my name's Troy. I'm from Boston. My question is, what's your take on term limits? Everyone in Congress seems to have been there for so long, and there's like so much dysfunction. I think it's necessary. Do you agree with it? How would you implement it? What's your take on that?
Well, we supported term limits in North Dakota, and we got them passed at the ballot this last year. We got them passed for both there was no term limit on governors and no term limits on members of our legislature, and we supported those. I think nationally, there's certainly a movement around that. If there was a movement going, we would support it, because I think that when you've got a higher degree of turnover, yeah, it breaks up the current power structures that happen, but you're gonna end up with certainly one thing you'll end up with a younger, a legislature that more matches the demographics of our country. And I think that with the change we're going through in the innovation and technology, that could be a very positive thing for our country to do that. So yeah, we're a supporter, and we got it done at home. Sir?
Governor, my name's Nathan. I live here in Exeter. Across the country, Republicans in general have been pretty much bleeding support from the younger generation, kids under 25, with their main issues being guns and the environment. What would you say to the youth of America about their concerns, and what policies would you do to alleviate some of their fears or worries? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Nathan. And this is an important piece for the Republican Party, because as we've seen just even here in New Hampshire, I think now the largest number of people in New Hampshire are neither Republicans or Democrats. It's independents. It's in the middle. And neither party can really win a national election anymore without pulling for independents. And so this increased, partisan on the edge, creates a problem. And it's not just youth. I mean, I've called it the exhausted majority. I mean, the people in the middle are like, hey, I'm sick and tired of this thing. And people like, oh, they tune into something. I mean, I had someone that I have worked with and known was going to have his 16-year-old daughter join him to watch one of the presidential debates this fall, one of the recent ones. They're 30 minutes into it, and she said to him, Dad, she goes, these people want to be president of the United States? And he goes, yeah. I mean, he's a seasoned political guy. Yeah. And she goes, if we were talking that way to each other, if we were interrupting each other that way, if we were calling each other names, whatever, we'd get thrown out of class. We wouldn't be like, oh, you're going to be in charge of the whole school. And so we had a 16-year-old that couldn't even map what was going on in our thing, because it's not the gravitas of a presidential primary debate. It's it's political theater, and it's reality TV designed for clickbait. And so we've got issues that you've talked about, whether it's guns and the environment, but we've got a whole issue that people look at politics in their youth and say, wow, really? And so we're losing that generation of people, and we have to figure out a way to bring it back, particularly at this critical time where again, with AI coming and everything that's happening, everything for our youth is going to change. They're all going to live to be 100. I mean, the fact that we will eliminate entire disease classes for that generation. So how do we create a vision where they can be part of moving our country forward, because they're going to be around here for a lot longer than we are. But on the two things on the environment, I've talked about that. If you care about the environment, then we should be supporting energy policies where we produce every drop of energy we can in the United States, and we produce all the base load we can in the United States. We do that because we do it cleaner, safer, smarter than anyone else. But somehow that we've got and particularly, I'll say the other party has created an idea that somehow if we kill U.S. energy production, that's good for the environment. That is just a falsehood, because when you kill energy here, you destroy supply. When you reduce supply, that increases price, drives up inflation for everybody, and then that supply gets filled from foreign sources that don't have an EPA, that don't have regulations, that don't care. Nobody cares about, in a state like North Dakota, nobody cares about the land, the water, the soil health, and the air more than those people that live there on the land. They're usually multi-generational farmers and ranchers. So we do it cleaner and better than anyone, and yet we're trying to stop doing that and outsource it to people that are still massively increasing their CO2. So we've got to change that thing. On the gun thing, goes back to what we talked about, mental health. Talks about mental health, talks about all this other stuff. We've got to have an understanding. People deserve in our country to have safe schools and safe cities, but that's not, it's become a partisan issue, but it shouldn't be. There's a way to support Second Amendment rights in this country and have this country be safer, not less safe.
So we're going to take one last question, right, before we have the governor give closing remarks. So, Governor, you get to pick the last person to go here.
I'll go to someone that hasn't spoken yet. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tom. I live in Newton, outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm an independent, like most people in the country nowadays. So there's a couple of things that I had thought up I wanted to ask about. One of them was we, as a country, subsidize the production and refining of fossil fuels. We take a lot of money from taxpayers and give it to large corporations in order to feed them and have them, some of the most successful and profitable companies in the world. We take our money and give it to them. And then we turn around and say, oh, you want to use that fuel? Well, now we're going to tax those same people, the fuel excise tax. So taxpayers pay twice to make it an uneven playing field. So, you know what I mean? We could use other forms of energy to power our corporations and so on, or other different things. But do you think that the federal government should be in the business of changing the playing field, that favoring one kind of energy over another? I mean, if we're going to subsidize, shouldn't it be for all? Or should we just get rid of those subsidies? Why were you making people pay twice so the corporations can be more profitable?
Well, thanks for driving up from Boston, but I would say, your question makes me think that you and I are both free market guys, because if in a perfect world, I would say we get rid of all of them. But those that, as a percentage of production that's actually produced, the ones we've subsidized the most are wind and solar. Those are the things where we've just poured, all kinds of money into those. But these subsidies and then the excise taxes vary by state. There's some federal, but there's other stuff that vary by state where people use them for roads. But that's a state decision on whether they want to have higher or low taxes on those prices. But I'm for someone who would say get rid of them all, because then we would actually let the markets, the markets could decide. But when we take a look at where the federal government has injected itself, and the two most grave examples are ones that we talk about the problem of student debt, 1.6 trillion. But that was a subsidy. That was a subsidy of higher education, because you'll give a student a loan, they turn around and give it to a college, the college turns around, raises tuition, and pays the professors more, and then we're subsidizing a form of education over career and technical, or over internships, or over co-ops, but we subsidize it to the point of 1.6 trillion. And then we've talked about healthcare a little bit today, and that's another one where on healthcare, where we've said, wow, healthcare keeps going up every year faster than the rate of inflation, for sure since the year 2000 it's gone up. And then you say, why is that happening? Well, this is the segment where we've poured more federal money in with more federal involvement, and at a time when we've got more baby boomer doctors and nurses retiring than we do we do have entering in the field. So we have fewer providers at a time when we have an aging population. So we've got a productivity issue. We have fewer providers to serve a larger aging population. And then the subsidies that went into that, and there was huge subsidies that went in around IT when we forced every hospital and clinic in America to make a decision to buy this kind of software, electronic health record software, which then created, a set of companies where their owners all became billionaires because we were subsidizing them. And at the end of the day, after 10 years of federal subsidy, both carrot, we're going to help pay for the software, and we're going to give you penalties in terms of reduced payments if you haven't achieved the term meaningful use of that software. And understand, it was 1970s database and a 1990s interface. There's issues with the software, but they were forced to basically to use that, and that it killed. I know because I was working to supporting some startups. We killed 500 to 1,000 innovative companies in America because of the subsidy of some existing players. So all the innovation was focused on how to make healthcare more productive and lower cost, and the federal government picked a winner. 2008, part of the original Obama bill, $30 billion. $30 billion went towards a few software companies. And at the end of the day, it's the only industry in the history of the world that's absorbed $1 trillion of IT expenses and then became less productive at the end. So I can just trace over my lifetime, anytime the federal government decides to get in and play in an industry like healthcare, like higher ed, or like energy, they don't make it better. They just raise the cost, they distort competition, and then who benefits? You were sort of implying this. The companies that then end up helping influence those rules are the ones that are the biggest companies with the most lobbyists and the most lawyers. They start influencing the rules that come out, and then innovation often occurs from the small startups, and we choke that out. I've just seen it over and over. So we've got to get back to, we have to reduce the size of the federal government. We got to get the federal government back in the lane. Should I transition into my closing? Maybe right now? Would you like me to do that?
One thing, we obviously know the governor loves basketball. So we're going to put you on a shot clock, but yeah, just finish out your question and then we can go to closing.
Okay, well, the other thing is I'm on this hardwood floor here, and I've been looking around all day for the hoop because I'm like, what is this, a gym, or what is this? But I do want to say in closing a couple things. I'm going to go back to gratitude for all of you, but I also want to say how important this is. And we talked at opening when Harold was talking about the opening about Abraham Lincoln speaking here in the history of the Republican Party. But there's another president that I love dearly, and that's Theodore Roosevelt. And we're building a presidential library for Theodore Roosevelt in North Dakota at the entrance to the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And I would invite all of you to come. The opening is going to be on July 4th, 2026 as part of an official USA 250 event. But across the many things that Theodore Roosevelt had an impact on, not the least of which was putting away 240 million acres of federal land. And when he put it away, he didn't say, we're putting it away so no one will ever set foot on it, we'll never cut a tree, we'll never develop the resources. That was a balance sheet for the future of America. That was a balance sheet for moments like now when our economy is struggling and we're competing globally. And he said, it's for the benefit and the use of the American people. And each generation should use it sustainably to make sure it's still there for the next generation. That's what we're doing. But right now, we've got a federal government that basically says it's all off limits. It's all off limits for anything, whether it's uranium production that would allow us to rebuild our nuclear base, which would give us carbon-free baseload electricity. You can't do that. Rare earth minerals can't do that. Oil and natural gas, which would be cleaner and safer and reduce CO2 emissions compared to foreign sources, can't do that. So that somehow they've got people convinced that if it's federal, that by doing the right thing, we're not using it. That land belongs to all of you. That land belongs to the citizens. It does not belong to a few unelected bureaucrats that are coming up with rules saying it can't be touched. And Americans should understand that you're paying more for everything and the environment's getting less clean because of an administration that says that federal land is theirs, not yours. And the other thing that Theodore Roosevelt did most importantly is when he was fighting about elections, we had party bosses, we had smoke-filled rooms, and we had powerful media companies at the turn of the century. And he's the guy that said, we need to have presidential primaries. These candidates shouldn't be decided in a small group of people. It should be decided by the people. So when we think about the, more than 100 years ago when New Hampshire became the first in the nation primary in their constitution, that was off the heels of him saying the power has to be to the people. And there's a great book called Let the People Rule that you can read about his contribution to that. And so I would say again in closing, gratitude for all of you, because your participation matters more than you know. You're the tip of the spear of America actually making the decision of who's the person for this moment of great uncertainty, this moment of great opportunity that we're facing in a country. Who's the person that's best equipped and has the most experience to be able to lead? And people have said, why did you get in the race? Well, part of it, I looked at the field. I didn't think it was crowded. People say, oh, it's such a crowded field. This is the most important job in the world, and we had a dozen people applying, and some of those people have never worked a day in the private sector. I looked down the line of the people at the last two debates, and I'm like, I'm not a guy that likes to talk about myself, but I would say, I know for a fact I've created more jobs than everybody else on the stage combined, and I'm the only one on that stage that's been making payroll every 2 weeks since I was in my mid-20s. I'm the only one who's, taken huge risks to be able to try to create jobs and jump into something that was, new and innovative, which then led to the creation of thousands and thousands of high-paying jobs. So when I think about the economy, and then I think about our border and border security, and we're a border state, 360 miles. I understand how the border works, and we've had North Dakota National Guard men and women troops on the border throughout my time in office. We cannot have national security without border security. And down there, we've had people flying helicopter missions from San Diego to the Gulf Coast on Lakota helicopters, night missions trying to stop transnational criminal organizations. I've been down there more times than Joe Biden. I will be down there in my first 2 weeks when I'm your president. He's been down there once in 2.5 years. And I know that those transnational criminal organizations, those cartels, they've got better intel, better funding, and better everything than we do. We're basically defunding our own border patrol. So that, I can guarantee you that I will understand how to step in on that day one, because we're already working on it. Energy policy that we're talking about, it's theoretical for others. We are already decarbonizing liquid fuels and saving American jobs and making us more safe. We're doing that today. On the economy, cutting spending, we're already doing that. Everything that everybody's talking about doing, I've already done, and I've been doing it my whole life. And so, of course, we'd love to ask for your support. We'd love for you to go to dougburgum.com and learn more. We'd love to have you volunteer here in the state. But I just want to close by saying, again, thank you to the First Lady. Thank you to all of you for here. Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks, USA Today. Thanks, Philip. Great to be with all of you. And it was an honor yesterday. We walked into the State House here in New Hampshire. We filed to be on the ballot. We look forward to your support. Thank you very much.
Governor Burgum, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone here in Exeter and all of those who watched on the live stream home. Please join us for our future series here of the Republican candidates. Thank you again, Governor.